The rain-slick streets of New York glistened under the pale light of street lamps. Midnight had drained the city of its noise, leaving only the faint hum of distant traffic and the whisper of wind between towering buildings. David was on his way home when he saw it, a figure-shaped shadow slipping into an alley ahead. It moved wrong. The light from the lamp didn't match the angle. It bent around corners where no surface existed. Curiosity prickled his skin. Against better judgment, he followed. The alley reeked of wet concrete and something metallic. His footsteps echoed, but so did another set, lighter and faster, always just ahead. He turned a corner. The shadow stood there, tall and thin, stretching unnaturally along the wall though no light fell on it. Then it peeled itself free, detaching from the brick like oil lifting from water. It smiled without a mouth. David tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat as the shadow surged forward. Cold wrapped around him like water in deep ocean. The city lights blinked out one by one. When they came back, the alley was empty. Only a new shadow lingered on the wall, shaped exactly like him. The shadow in the alley. Rain had turned the streets of Manhattan into black rivers, swallowing reflections of neon and moonlight. The hour was late, far too late for the comforting chatter of pedestrians or the wail of impatient taxis. Only the sound of distant sirens and the quiet, measured rhythm of David's footsteps remained. He was cutting through the Lower East Side, taking a route he never used. The city felt different tonight. Quieter, as if something large was holding its breath. Halfway down Delancey Street, he saw it. A shadow. It slipped into a narrow alley between two buildings. At first, David thought it belonged to a person, maybe someone avoiding the rain. But the movement was wrong. The figure seemed to glide, and its edges shimmered faintly, as if it were painted in smoke. Even stranger, the shadow didn't match any light source. The nearest street lamp was behind David, yet the silhouette still fell away from him. Curiosity bloomed in his chest, heavy and foolish. He stepped into the alley. The air was colder here. Each breath condensed into mist that lingered longer than it should. Water dripped somewhere deep inside, the sound irregular, like a heartbeat struggling to keep time. David's sneakers splashed quietly through shallow puddles, his steps echoing against the brick walls. But after a few moments, he realized something unsettling: his echoes weren't matching his stride. They were faster. He turned sharply, nothing behind him. Just black walls and rain-slick concrete. Yet from ahead, deeper in the alley, came the faint sound of wet footsteps hurrying away. He followed. The alley narrowed until the buildings on either side leaned together like old conspirators, blocking out the moon. Ahead, a figure stood against the far wall. It was tall, stretched thin like a shadow cast in the last light of day, but there was no light here. It had no texture, no face, just a smooth blackness that drank the air around it. David's breath hitched. He should have left. He should have run. But instead, he stepped closer. The thing tilted its head, as if curious about him in return. Then, slowly, impossibly, it peeled away from the wall. Its body bent and warped, detaching like wet paper from glass. For the first time, David realized, there had never been a wall at all. It was the shadow holding itself there, waiting. The shape pulsed once, and then it moved toward him without walking. Its presence was cold, the kind of cold that reached deep into the bones, like being buried in snow. David stumbled back, but the shadow moved faster, folding the darkness around him like a blanket. His scream came out as a whisper, swallowed before it could reach the air. Then the world went black. When the rain stopped and the clouds broke, the alley stood empty. Only the walls remained, and on them, under the dim light of a distant lamp, a new shadow had appeared. It was shaped exactly like a man standing very still. Evelyn was running late. The subway had stalled twice, and now she was cutting through the same narrow backstreets David had taken the night before. The air smelled faintly of rain and rust. She almost missed the alley. Something in her peripheral vision caught her attention, a movement that didn't match the wind. She glanced left. A shadow stood on the brick wall, sharp and distinct in the dim light. It looked like a man, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly forward as if listening. But there was no one there to cast it. Evelyn froze. The shadow tilted its head toward her. She laughed nervously, trying to convince herself she was imagining it. But when she took a cautious step forward, the shadow stepped forward too, not on the wall, but toward her, flattening and stretching along the ground as if trying to close the distance. Her heart thudded. She stepped back. The shadow stopped. "Okay, weird," she whispered. From the far corner of the alley came a faint dripping sound, slow, steady, too perfectly timed, like someone tapping their finger in thought. The smell of damp concrete thickened, and with it came something else, faint but metallic, like blood. Evelyn's instincts screamed at her to leave. She turned away. That's when she heard footsteps. Not hers. They were quick, deliberate, slapping against wet ground. She spun around. The alley was empty, but the shadow was no longer on the wall. It was on the ground, right behind her. The air around her dropped to a winter chill. Her breath fogged. The shadow rose, stretching upward, forming into the tall, featureless figure that David had seen before. It tilted its head again, the same curious gesture. And then, without warning, it stepped into her. The world collapsed into darkness. When Evelyn's eyes opened again, she was still standing in the alley. But her body didn't feel like hers. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, guided by something unseen. In the corner of her mind, she could still hear the faint dripping sound, keeping time like a slow heartbeat. From somewhere deep inside her, David's voice whispered. "Don't follow it." Chapter 3, The Collector. Evelyn didn't remember walking home. One moment she was in the alley, the next she was unlocking her apartment door, her hands trembling without her telling them to. Her shoes left wet prints across the hardwood, but she didn't take them off. She went to the bathroom mirror. Her reflection was wrong. At first, it was subtle, the angle of her head, the stillness of her shoulders. Then she noticed the eyes. They didn't blink. Not once. They stared back at her with a depth that wasn't hers, like she was looking through a window into a night sky with no stars. She stepped back from the mirror. Her reflection stayed still. Then it smiled. The lights flickered. Somewhere in her apartment, water began dripping, but she had no leaky faucet. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from inside her skull. Each drop carried a whisper, low and distant, a language she couldn't understand but somehow felt in her bones. Evelyn gripped the sink. "What are you?" The voice in her head was two voices, overlapping. Hers, and a man's. "David. It doesn't just take you," he whispered. "It keeps you." Images burned into her mind, a place that wasn't a place, an endless hallway made of wet stone where shadows walked without bodies. They lined the walls like paintings, their faces still, their eyes open, watching. Every few seconds, one would twitch, shifting slightly, like it remembered something. Evelyn's knees weakened. "Why me?" David's voice faltered. "It collects the curious. We all followed it. We all thought we could leave." The reflection leaned closer to the glass, though Evelyn hadn't moved. Its mouth opened wide, too wide, and from it, the dripping grew louder, faster, turning into a roar. Her apartment lights went out. The reflection stepped out of the mirror. Evelyn ran. The apartment hallway was impossibly long, stretching far beyond its real dimensions. Every bulb above her flickered in sequence as she passed, each flash revealing the shadow just a few steps behind, tall, featureless, relentless. Her lungs burned, but the air was cold and heavy, dragging her down. She slammed through the stairwell door and bolted downward, yet every flight felt steeper than the last, like she was sinking instead of descending. The dripping sound followed her. When she reached the ground floor, the lobby was gone. Instead, she stood in the alley where it had all begun, slick brick walls, pools of rainwater, and the faint hum of the city far away. Only this alley was wrong. It stretched into blackness on both ends, the city lights smothered. The buildings leaned in close, their walls wet and glistening like the inside of a throat. David stood at the far end. But his eyes were empty, his movements slow and puppet-like. "Evelyn," he said, though his voice was two voices now, his and the shadows. "It's easier if you stop running." Behind her, the shadow rose, spilling across the walls, surrounding her. Each part of it rippled with faint human shapes, their mouths open in silent screams. She could feel their presence in her head, whispering fragments of memory, pleading without words. She realized then, the dripping wasn't water. It was time. Each drop was another second she had left, and the sound was slowing. Her instincts screamed to run, but her curiosity, the same thing that had drawn her into the alley, pulled her toward David. Maybe there was a way out. Maybe. She took a single step forward. The shadow closed in. Cold wrapped around her ankles, her waist, her chest, pulling her into the wall. Her breath frosted the air as her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The last thing she saw was her own shadow flattening against the brick beside David's. When the city lights returned, the alley was empty. Only two shadows lingered on the wall now, standing side by side, waiting. There was no pain. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was standing on a slick stone floor under a sky that wasn't a sky, black, endless, and pressing down on her like deep ocean. The air was damp, filled with the sound of dripping from nowhere and everywhere at once. Before her stretched an endless corridor of walls, each surface alive with shadows. Some were still. Others twitched slightly, their faces frozen in mid-expression, fear, shock, sorrow. They were flat, painted into reality, yet she could feel their eyes on her. David was there. Not beside her, but in the wall to her right, his form warped by the uneven surface. His lips didn't move, but his voice filled her head. "You shouldn't have stepped forward." Evelyn's own body felt heavier, harder to move. She looked down. Her legs were already blending into the stone, their outlines soft and dark, her skin taking on that strange, shadow-like texture. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice sounding hollow in her ears. David's eyes shifted toward the far end of the corridor, though it had no end. "The collector's gallery." She turned slowly. Something was moving in the darkness, tall, shapeless, gliding along the floor without sound. Every shadow on the walls flinched as it passed, but none dared move. It stopped in front of Evelyn. Up close, its form wasn't empty, it was made of thousands of smaller shadows writhing together, merging into something vaguely human. It studied her, tilting its head the way it had in the alley. In her mind, 1,000 whispers spoke at once. She caught fragments. "Curiosity, yours now, stay." Evelyn tried to back away, but the wall was behind her now, pulling her in. Her hands sank first, vanishing into the cold stone as if into deep water. She screamed, and the collector leaned closer, pressing a long, featureless hand to her chest. The cold spread instantly. Her heartbeat slowed. Her vision dimmed. Before the darkness took her completely, she heard David again, closer this time, almost in her ear. "The longer you're here, the less you remember who you were." Then the stone swallowed her whole. And Evelyn joined the wall. Time didn't exist here. There was only the drip. Evelyn didn't know how long she had been part of the wall. Her thoughts were slow, syrup-thick, like trying to dream underwater. Faces surrounded her, some familiar from fleeting moments in life, others strangers forever frozen in the same silent scream. Most didn't move. But one did. A shadow 2 places to her left, a man with sharp eyes and a grin that didn't match the terror in this place. He leaned toward her as much as the stone allowed. You're new, his voice whispered in her mind. She blinked, or thought she did. Who are you? Doesn't matter. His tone was oddly amused. What matters is, I can move. And he could. His arms slid partially free from the wall, stretching into the space between them like thick smoke. Evelyn had seen no one else manage this, not even David. How? She asked. He leaned closer, his grin widening. Because I don't belong here. Not really. I wasn't taken. I came in. Her chest tightened. Why? To take something back, he said, voice turning cold. And maybe, to take the collector apart while I'm at it. The corridor seemed to grow darker, as if the place itself had heard him. Evelyn's own outline flickered faintly, a hint of movement where her shoulder met the wall. The man noticed. You're not fully anchored yet. That's good. That means we can get out, if we time it right. Before she could reply, the dripping stopped. Every shadow in the corridor went still. The air became crushingly cold. From far down the endless hallway, the collector began to move toward them. The man didn't flinch. When it reaches us, don't fight it. Let it pull you forward, but not all the way. That's when we run. Evelyn's voice shook. Run where? There's nowhere here. His grin sharpened. Oh, there's somewhere. You just haven't seen the cracks yet. The sound of the collector's approach filled the corridor. And for the first time since she'd been taken, Evelyn felt something that wasn't dread. It was the smallest flicker of hope. The collector's heavy footsteps echoed through the endless corridor, each drop of the dripping sound now a thunderous beat in Evelyn's ears. The shadows lining the walls pressed closer, their silent faces watching, waiting. The man who could move stretched his free arm, pointing ahead. There, he whispered. Evelyn squinted into the darkness and saw it, faint, jagged lines running across the stone walls like cracks in a shattered mirror. They pulsed with a dim light, barely noticeable but unmistakably real. That's the exit, the man said, voice low but urgent. The cracks are weak points in the collector's hold. We can slip through if we move fast. Behind them, the collector's presence grew stronger, a wave of cold washing over the corridor. The shadows on the walls began to ripple, some twisting into grotesque faces as if sensing the rebellion. Evelyn's heart hammered. Her body still felt heavy, but she forced herself to move, step by slow step, toward the glowing cracks. The man slid further free from the wall, now nearly half out, his grin sharper than ever. Remember, he said, when the collector reaches out, don't resist, use its pull to launch yourself through the cracks. It's the only way. The dripping stopped. Silence fell like a suffocating blanket. Then the collector appeared, a towering mass of writhing shadows, its featureless head tilting with curiosity. It reached out a long, dark hand, fingertips barely touching the stone floor. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep into her bones. The cracks shimmered brighter, waiting. The collector's hand shot forward. With a sudden burst, Evelyn let herself be pulled, and at the last moment, she twisted, plunging through the glowing cracks. The world shattered into light and sound. She stumbled forward, free air filling her lungs. Behind her, the corridor collapsed, shadows screaming as the cracks closed like a trap. But she was out. For now. Evelyn gasped, stumbling onto a cracked sidewalk bathed in pale dawn light. The city around her buzzed softly, distant horns, footsteps, the familiar chaos of New York waking up. Her body felt strange, lighter, but weak, as if she'd been underwater too long. She looked down. Her hands were real, flesh and bone. For a moment, hope surged through her veins. But then she saw it, a faint, dark outline stretching from her feet, merging back into the cracked concrete. Her shadow. It flickered unnaturally, twitching as if alive, and Evelyn shivered. The collector hadn't released her completely. She needed help. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You escaped the gallery. But it's still inside you. The cracks are only temporary. David's voice echoed in her mind. The collector doesn't just keep shadows. It waits. It hunts. And it remembers. Determined, Evelyn rose and headed toward the nearest subway entrance. If she was going to fight, she needed answers, and allies. Because somewhere deep in the city, the shadow waiting in the alley had just grown a little darker. And the game was far from over. Evelyn's footsteps echoed in the empty subway station, her breath coming in short bursts. The message burned in her mind like a warning, the collector remembers. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting the tall, featureless shadow to emerge from the dark tunnels. But nothing came. Only the cold flicker of fluorescent lights above. Her phone buzzed again. Find me if you want to live. No name. No number. Just those 4 words. The voice in her head was unmistakable. David. She swallowed her fear and typed back. Where? Minutes passed before the reply came. Brooklyn. Abandoned subway. Midnight. Evelyn clenched her fists. This wasn't over. The collector's grip might be fading, but its reach was long, and it was hunting. At midnight, she would have to face the shadows again. But this time, she wouldn't run. She would fight. At midnight, Evelyn stood at the mouth of the forgotten subway tunnel in Brooklyn. The entrance was choked with rusted metal and graffiti, swallowing the weak light from her flashlight. The air smelled of damp earth and something darker, decay, or maybe memories long buried. Her shadow flickered unnaturally on the cracked pavement, reminding her that part of the collector still clung to her. She stepped inside. The tunnel walls seemed to breathe, pulsing faintly as whispers curled in the stale air. Deeper in, faint dripping echoed, the same sound that haunted her dreams. Suddenly, from the darkness, a figure emerged, David. Or what was left of him. His eyes glowed faintly, and his voice was layered with shadows. You made it. But it's not just the collector we have to worry about anymore. Before Evelyn could ask, a chilling presence filled the tunnel. The collector had followed her here, a living shadow stretching impossibly long, ready to engulf everything in darkness. Evelyn's grip tightened on the flashlight. This was the battle for her soul, and for the city's shadows. The tunnel trembled as the collector's dark mass surged forward, swallowing the weak light from Evelyn's flashlight. The shadows writhed, faces forming and dissolving in its endless depths. David stepped beside Evelyn, his form flickering between human and shadow. You have to confront it. Not run. Evelyn's heart pounded. She focused, pushing back the cold seeping from the darkness, remembering the cracks, the only escape. With a deep breath, she raised the flashlight and aimed its beam directly at the collector's core. The light sliced through the darkness, revealing jagged cracks in its shadowy flesh. The collector recoiled, shrieking in a soundless howl that shook the tunnel walls. Evelyn stepped forward, moving toward the cracks, her own shadow flickering wildly behind her. Now! David shouted. Evelyn leapt into the cracks, feeling the cold shatter around her like glass. The world twisted, and then she was back in the alley, drenched in rain, gasping for air. The shadows on the walls were gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, the city was quiet. But somewhere deep inside, Evelyn knew, the collector wasn't destroyed. It was waiting. The streets of New York filled again with the sounds of morning, voices, footsteps, sirens. The morning mist faded, and the city awoke from its sleep. Evelyn stood on the same corner where her nightmare had begun. She looked down, at her own shadow. It moved normally, calmly, as it should. But deep inside her mind lingered a small spark, an echo of shadows that never forget and never let go. Somewhere far away, in a dark alley, a new shadow appeared, different, yet just as cold and merciless. And the game begins again.